Well, Cheryl, welcome to my Core Connections podcast. I am so excited for today's conversation. As I shared with you briefly before we push record, I have my own mold house story as well as you do. So this to me is, and I know when you popped on, you were like, this must be a personal story because I get so passionate about helping to just bring more awareness to my audience, my ladies listening, because if you don't know, you don't know. And I just think that this is a topic of conversation that more people need to be aware of. So I am so grateful for you and everything you're doing. And I am so grateful that we were able to coordinate and we get to have this amazing, amazing conversation today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. When I saw when I saw you reaching out, I was kind of a little bit because I'm in the building space.
Yeah.
So my name is Cheryl Ciecko, and I am a licensed architect and have been for. I'm going to just stop at over 30 years. So it's never going to change. It's always going to be over 30 years, but for a very long time. And and I do have a story. So one of my children was affected. So I had four children. I have four children. They're adults now, but they weren't always adults. And 18, 19 years ago, one of my children got very sick. And she was 10, and she was and as a licensed architect, I kind of, I'm always looking at buildings. I was trying to buy a good house for our family, and we were going to build a house and all this stuff, and she had full-on asthma, inhalers at home and in school. She then started having migraine headaches. Like she's 10 and she has migraine headaches. So we're doing the CAT scans and all that stuff. No one else appeared to be sick. I did have some autoimmune stuff going on, but why would I connect that to her having asthma?
Right.
She always had eczema and skin rashes and stuff. So she's more sensitive. So I have one daughter and three sons, and she's clearly more sensitive. And by all I can say is divine intervention, that somehow I ended up at a CEU program at that time, continuing education program for my license as an architect on mold in commercial buildings. And I can tell you that light bulb moment after light bulb moment was happening in this presentation. The biggest ones that I would share with your audience to be aware of is that you can be sick every single place you go, and it can be because of where you sleep.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize was that it isn't all, some people do have the walk into a space and their eyes start running and there's like, oh my God, there's something in that space. But majority of people, it's not that. It's that they end up having some other health issues, and and they're sick everywhere they go. They were sick outside, they're sick at a restaurant, they're sick at school, they're sick at work. Why would they think it's in their home? And I think that was the biggest light bulb moment that I try to share with other people is rule out something that you can't see, and you can't see it. So we had nothing to see in our house that I could think of. There's no water damage. We had just bought it about 6 months before, which is why it was interesting that her decline kind of happened in October when we closed the windows in our house. So we were, lots of playing outside, and then we go inside because it's fall, and she's can't even go to school. She's literally has migraine headaches. Um, and so this program mentioned the ductwork. I said, well, you could actually have mold in your ductwork. And as an architect, my ductwork's metal. Why mold doesn't grow on metal? Why would I have mold in my ductwork? That's crazy. It was a 1950s house that we had purchased, and it was previously a rental, so not well maintained necessarily. And I immediately came home from this program and thought, ductwork, really? So I took the vent cover off, got my screwdriver out, took the vent cover off, and it was horrific what I saw. The
Oh,
amount of
wow. You could
accumulated
see it.
debris, dust, hair from animals, people, skin cells, whatever, it was coated. And I do tell the rest of the story with pictures in a duct cleaning webinar that I offer through my website, which is avoidingmold.com. But I did what everybody would do, and I tried to hire someone to clean my ducts. We did test it, and that was just a swab sample, and there was aspergillus in there, which is a mold spore that can kill somebody in a large quantity. And I'm thinking, I have this little girl. This is bad. This has to be related to her condition, even though it seemed illogical. And sure enough, it came back with aspergillus, and I hired a duct cleaner to clean. I checked their references. They were certified, all this stuff. Well, it didn't take very long into their cleaning for me to recognize that they were a scam. They had cameras and they had all this stuff, but one guy was keeping me talking while the other guy was moving really fast. And I said, I couldn't believe they were done with one duct. So I said, remove that duct cover. I'm going to stick my arm down there. And I did, and pulled my arm out with a handful of dust and junk that they said they were done on that duct. So I said they should leave, and the rest of the story is in that webinar. But the short end of that story is that I ended up having to learn how to clean the ducts myself. Not that I was going to do it, because I don't have that kind of equipment and I didn't want it, but I needed to know enough about how to clean ducts to be able to hire someone and know they were doing a good job.
Yeah,
So
you
it's
said,
not that, yeah, go
you
ahead.
said something, no, you said something, Cheryl. Sorry to interject, but this was when we were going through mold and dealing with the house and trying to figure it all out. And this is partly why I wanted to have you on here too, is there are a lot of scammers out there. And that was the thing, looking back, I was like, we had some crazy, insane quotes to just even clean our house. And I'm like, really? Like it was crazy. And I feel for anyone going through mold that may be going through it now or in the future, maybe going through it, because there may be a light bulb moment in our conversation, which is why I want to have this, because it can really change people's lives for the better once you figure it out. But be aware of the scammers out there. And I always tell, and again, this is why, Cheryl, I want everyone to know about you as a resource, because I feel like when you start searching online with like mold and house, there's a lot of really like bad, like scary tactics out there. Like they scare you, it's fear mongering. Like that's kind of how I felt. And looking back, I would have done things differently if I knew what I knew now. And so continue, Cheryl.
Yes, me too. In them leaving, they blew dust all over my house.
Yeah, that's
Um,
not good.
and so what the other thing is, so I already talked about that she had asthma, full-on asthma, inhalers, migraine, headaches. So those are some symptoms. I have 3 other children, and me and my husband also, and I didn't realize at the time that there were symptoms that started after this that were related. So I had one son ended up with ADD. I 100% think it was related. Another son had something that's called mold rage. So all of a sudden, he's in high school and he's like breaking garbage cans. He's losing his temper in a very uncharacteristic way. And that is a thing. So mold is a neurotoxin. They're biotoxins they use in biological warfare, and they can affect the brain. That's why the ADD, inability to concentrate. Some people have insomnia. Some people get depressed. So they seem very benign symptoms. I had an autoimmune disease. I think it was related. Although I would say that mine was also other toxins, including heavy metals. So you start accumulating all these things. But I didn't realize till much later that all these symptoms that I'm dealing with my kids were probably had something to do with that mold exposure. But that doesn't mean we weren't exposed in other places at other times. I'm sure we were. So at some point, your bucket fills up and then it overflows because it's like it's enough. My husband, who was perfectly fine and very healthy through all of this, ended up getting very sick about 8 years after that.
Wow, because he was still hanging on to the
his
mold in his
bucket was
cells.
filling up. He wasn't ready to overflow yet. But something else would come along that would help him to overflow his bucket and get very, very sick. He ended up on disability, actually short-term disability. He has since recovered, so that's the good news. If someone is very, very sick and he couldn't, so he had Graves' disease, if you've heard of that, and thyroid eye disease. So his eyes were going in different direction. We were told that that was permanent. Um, and it would need 4 surgeries, but maybe it wouldn't fix anything and he'd be blind, all this stuff.
Mm.
Very depressing conversation coming home from the University of Michigan to Chicago, where I was living at the time. And, but it was related to that. It was related to heavy metals. It was related to Lyme disease, which we both also had. So once your body is exposed to something that's burden, and it could be heavy metals in dental work, and that's what we had, but we've already start to have a burden on our body. We don't have the energy maybe that we would like, even if we try to work out. And then you add in something that you're breathing every minute of the day. The body has to decide what to focus on. So a lot of people who have Lyme disease and are having a struggle in resolving that, it's because there's another burden.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be the air you breathe. Now, the other piece, which you probably talk about, just judging by everything that I've seen on you, is it's food. So we have a lot of toxins in food. We have toxins in water, toxins in lotions and deodorants and all these products that we use. But again, they're all accumulating, and the air we breathe is the one thing that's ubiquitous that is really hard to overcome. So I had also gotten sick, but my husband got sicker than me faster. And so in my research for Lyme disease, I started noticing all these people talking about mold. Since that time when this all happened 18 years ago, I made it my goal. I knew I had a child that was sensitive to mold and dust, because mold lives on dust. That's how there was mold in the ductwork. Mold's living on the dirt and dust and ductwork, not on the metal. And then humidity. I started doing all my continuing education required for my license on building science topics. And then it wasn't until my husband got sick with Lyme, and I'm seeing all these people in social media groups talking about mold because they're related, but I didn't know that yet, that I started helping people for free. And then they just kept coming. People started to realize I knew answers to things. And then I created a Facebook group, Avoiding Water Damage, Mold, and Toxins. When it was really good when it was 100 people, 200, 300, even 1,000. And my goal was to keep the science clear there. Well, now it's over 5,000, closing on 6. And I honestly, I'm not there very much anymore but there are people who are good students that are there. I do come in and out, but that's how my journey to do this work, where now I help people online because I have done so much research. It's happened to me. I've been very sick. As a visual person, as an architect, I've been in the parking lot and I can't think of where I put my car. That's related.
Yeah. Yeah. So many things.
So here I am.
Yeah.
Still struggling, still trying to recover my health. I was diagnosed with lupus and Sjogren's syndrome. I do put the beginning to heavy metals, but definitely we did have mold even in the house that I built. So it doesn't mean you have a dirty house. It doesn't mean that you have a house that's poorly built. It can be, our buildings are made by human beings who can make mistakes. And then there's weathering and life and aging and stuff. And you can have mold and it can be completely 100% concealed and still be affecting your health.
Yeah, absolutely. So many things you said there, Cheryl. But one thing I want everyone to key into is some of the symptoms, because one of the key things, and I know this was for me with mold, is you have basically like just this massive list of symptoms, and then you basically go get blood work done, and you're like, my doctor was like, well, your iron's low, take iron. And right then and there, I knew, okay, I've had 3 babies. I've never had low iron with having 3 pregnancies. So there's something, going on. And anyway, so it is when this slew of symptoms, asthma is a really key one. And I remember my son dealt with that severely. And when we detoxed him from mold, knock on wood, we've not had any more. And when we went to the specialist, she even said, she's like, I don't quote me on the stats, but I think it was somewhere around like 80% of asthma is mold related. And I say that again for moms listening, because I see so many kids get put on the albuterol and all that kind of stuff that it speeds up their heart rate, and it's a steroid, and long-term use. there's something else going on that could fix it, you know, that would be great. And one other thing I just want to mention with the asthma stuff is red light therapy. I don't know, Cheryl, if you do much with red light therapy, but I discovered with my son when we were healing that instead of giving him albuterol, I would do red light therapy, 10 minutes on his chest, 10 minutes on his back. And he was like, how old is he then? Like 8? He was like 8-ish. And it had the same effect as albuterol. I didn't have to give him a steroid. So it really helped in our healing. It was very fabulous. So it's, I don't know. We could
Wow.
talk all day about health stuff. So we got to get to the house stuff.
Yeah. So, that's interesting. I don't know that much. I know stuff about light in general, but it's not something that I've done. So this was all happening for me in 2005.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So,
there
yeah.
wasn't Facebook groups to even go to at that time.
No.
There was nowhere to research this stuff. So I would, yeah. So, um, in terms of the health stuff, that is the thing that I think about. I mean, children for me, I raised 4. So the fact that there are kids out there that are being treated for asthma, that it's probably something to do with where they're living. There's people with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, any autoimmune disease, I would consider. Look for other burdens because I don't test positive for lupus or Sjogren's anymore, and those are permanent. My husband doesn't test, he
Yay.
reversed his Graves' disease. They wanted to take out his thyroid, and his thyroid, he still has his thyroid. He had double vision. He looked kind of like he was out of Harry Potter movie or something. When I was looking up, when I was very disfiguring, and he was in sales, very disfiguring. And 5 years, 6 years, maybe it took, but eventually with just taking out toxins anywhere you can and putting in good stuff anywhere you can, that he recovered. So that's the hope part of it.
Yes.
But the ADD, so I did have a kid with ADD. And I think how many of our ADD, ADHD kids, is there a connection to environment and food?
And I'll add to that, Cheryl, with autism as well. I have a friend of mine, her son um, ended up becoming autistic because of mold exposure. And they reversed that in like, I want to say it was like 3 months. They hit it hard and got that mold out. And she got her son back. So there are just so many things. And like you said, with mold is a toxin and it goes to the brain. And so it can cause so many issues. So yeah. So Cheryl, oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was just going to say the
Yeah,
fact that it's so different for different people and that one person in the family can be perfectly fine and they can't understand it.
yeah,
That's normal. And that's why it's so difficult to figure out. And for some families, it's very difficult because you have somebody saying, like, why should we spend all this money? I feel fine.
right, exactly. Okay, so we got to talk about what are some things that we could look for in our house that could indicate there's mold, especially if women listening are like, oh, some of this is kind of ringing a bell to me. And I'm like that intuitive feeling too. And I know you mentioned the ductwork, but what are some other signs that we can look for that could indicate there's mold in the house?
So the first one that I usually suggest people look at is their humidity levels. And you're going to see online, you're going to see different things where people say, oh, it has to be above 60% relative humidity. Know that humidity is relative to temperature, but my recommendation would be 40 or under at any time of the year. And if you live in a northern climate, the North Dakotas, the Minnesotas, the Montanas of the world, where it's very, very cold, you may have to be 30, 20. As it gets colder outside, your humidity must go down or you will end up with condensation. Condensation can be a source of bulk water that can affect our buildings where we can't see it behind walls. So ice dams would be another one in the cold climates. In the warm climates, the Floridas, the Southeast, and even the Arizonas and the New Mexicos, they have different challenges. So the Southeast, the Florida area, that's going to be humidity outside, trying to manage that. We're air conditioning a lot. And then in the south, in the southwest, where we have desert, we have actually we do have the potential for humidity because it's water damage in our bathrooms, water damage under our sinks. So that's raising humidity. So I'd get the little $15, whatever it is, humidity monitor, and I'd start to understand your building, start to understand your home room by room. Don't look at the one on the thermostat and say, oh, it says it's 40 right here. No, don't trust that. That's an average of your whole house. Leave it in the bathroom for a couple days. Leave it in the bedroom. Put it in a corner where your child sleeps who's sick, and an exterior corner, and see if the numbers are the same. We're looking for anomalies, and we're looking for if something's different. And that's I had concealed mold in my bathroom in a house I built years later, and and the way we found it was humidity. So I noticed the door was sticking in the winter, a wood door. That's odd. That means the door was swelling. And so then I measured the humidity and it came back 70, but my rest of my house was 35. And after I yelled at the kids for not using the exhaust fan and that kind of thing, and we went away for a weekend, came back, it was still 70. So that's where my journey started, to really try to figure out how to diagnose something you can't see. But it's like taking your temperature. If you have a fever, if you have, if something in your health isn't right, you start looking to professionals to help you figure it out, and don't take no for an answer. So I hired people to do testing. We did all the different kinds of testing that there is. Everybody's like, oh, there's nothing here. There's nothing here. There's nothing here. I knew the humidity was high there. It stayed high. And I knew that wasn't normal, and that there had to be a reason that the humidity was high in that one room. And
That's
eventually we did find a
interesting.
leak. It was the water was being absorbed into insulation, so you weren't going to see it anywhere. But there was mold, and we did resolve it all. And we found it personally in our blood work. So there's some blood work you can do that'll show you have high titers. And my husband and I both had the similar raised levels. And so we figured it has to be here somewhere. It took me about 6 months. And I built the house. But eventually I came to the conclusion of I have to figure this out myself, because I'm the only one who cares that much, that I'm going to scour. And so on my website, which is avoidingmold.com, I have free videos, and where I talk about how I tested tile, for instance. Very simple, low cost piece of equipment I use for that. But I always start with humidity. Then the second one would be visual. Just
Okay,
look
Cheryl,
around.
I want to pause you because I have a question dealing with humidity. What are your thoughts in, because I live in Iowa, where kind of that Minnesota weather, we're not quite as cold as long, but we get such cold, dry winters where it's like literally can be -30 with wind chill for a couple days in the winter, to like 110 or 115 heat index, in the summer with crazy, crazy high humidity. And in the winter, I know people will be like, oh my gosh, it's so dry out here, right? And so people will put humidifiers on their HVAC systems. Now, ours had it before mold, but I refused to get it. We got rid of it after mold because I was concerned that that could been contributing to, something. So what are your thoughts on humidifiers on
Well,
HVAC systems?
yeah. All of our HVAC systems need to be maintained and cleaned, and there's filters in humidification systems as well. So I've had a bunch of situations. Currently, I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So not very dry, but also very cold. And we do have a humidifier on our furnace. The key to having one is that it's not a turn it on, let it go, never watch it again. It is something you only would turn on when it gets cold enough that you're feeling like it's dry, because you're watching your humidity in your house. And if you start watching the humidity, and the humidity is going to depend on how many kids you have, how many people are in the home, if you're working out in the room, how many people are taking showers, where they're taking showers, where you're drying towels that are from the shower. All those things will affect. So my humidity in my home, when I had 4 kids living there, we were 6 people living in the house, and a dog, became much less when it became just my husband and I.
Okay.
And so, but in terms of on the furnace, it is an active event of you go turn it on, then there's temperatures on it. And you start with the temperature outside being the highest. And as the temperature drops outside and it's starting to get like 15 degrees below, there's a setting for that, which is going to reduce the humidity. And people don't know that to do that.
No,
They
I
just,
didn't.
in fact, as it gets colder and drier, which it will, and you're starting to have static shocks and everything, you actually do have to reduce your humidity for that temporary period of time. What I recommend for people who are uncomfortable is that you get a personal humidifier, one that you can put near your bed. Then you run it near your bed at the point of source where you're breathing or where your children are sleeping, and you turn it off when you're done. Or you could leave it on. Generally, that's in a bigger room than overall trying to humidify the whole thing where you're not feeling it, but we just need. Otherwise, people, if you live in a cold climate and you see condensation on your windows, your humidity is too high.
That's a good indication. And then also too with the little portable humidifiers, I just want to remind people, make sure that you air those out well when you're not using them, or they will get mold, and then you turn it on and then you're just going to spew mold throughout your room. So really, really got to make sure those things are dried out well when you're not using them.
Right. And then in the summer, you have to get a dehumidifier. If you're in
Oh
Iowa,
yeah.
you have a lower level for sure. Anybody who has a cellar, a basement, a crawl space, even, those need to be dehumidified because we're often running air conditioning and that cold air is dropping to the lower level. And there's nothing mold likes more than cold and damp.
Yeah, we do dehumidifiers, one in the basement, one on the main floor, and we empty a couple of gallons a day from my house. That like when we started doing that, I was shocked. I was like, if I could only save this water for the winter, then we'd be balanced.
Yeah. But that is a sign. If someone needs to dehumidify their house in the winter, there's something else going on.
No, I'm not dehumidifying in the winter. No,
Right,
that's
right.
just
But
in
I'm
the
just saying
summer.
for
Yeah.
everyone
Oh,
else,
gotcha. Yeah.
that would be a symptom of if you feel like you have to dehumidify your home, even in the South, in the winter when you're running heat is drying. That makes no sense. There's got to be a reason. So, but also the other tip that I would have for everyone would be dehumidify your garage, especially attached garages. Because, and then if it gets really, really cold, you might not be able to. I know ours kind of froze up here in Cheyenne last winter when it was in the single digits, but we did it when we could because you're driving your car into the garage full of snow or rain
Mhm.
and it's dripping all day, then into the night, and you end up with puddles in your garage. And that makes your garage that may have drywall, but it does have wood frame and everything else, and sometimes living space nearby that is raising the humidity in that space. And we find a lot of mold concealed behind the walls in garages that have been around for a while that have basically, you know, the gypsum and drywall just absorbs moisture out of the air. And
Are
if
there
it's a
other materials? Are there other materials that people can use if they're say going to remodel, remediate, or build a new house that you can use something that's more of a barrier if you've got an attached garage?
that is what a lot of people will talk about in groups, and it's always trying to find. I would call that kind of the easy button. What can I do that just won't get moldy? It's like the ductwork wasn't going to get moldy either. It was metal. So the ductwork got
Mhm.
dirty, and so then mold grows on the dirt. So the same is true of any other materials. There's mold will grow on any material, metal, um, MGO board, plaster, any material that has dirt and dust in the area. And in our wall cavities,
Okay.
there's usually going to be dirt and dust. So I would say I don't focus on the materials very much. You do want non-toxic materials. You want materials that aren't going to off gas. Um, the paper on the drywall is what grows mold, quite frankly, the most, but the gypsum core is absorbing humidity. So go to the root cause is my suggestion.
Mm.
Is control, manage, monitor your humidity. And then and so that's what the dehumidifier in the garage is going to do. In some cases, if it's gone, 20 years and nobody ever did this, then there may be a reason to remove the drywall if there's drywall there and check things and redo that. But in fact, I find that a lot is a cause. But know that any room that's attached to our house, even a garage that's unheated, there is going to be air changes between that space, between your attic, between your crawl space, between your basement. We don't build hermetically sealed homes, even though we're trying to build really tight. There's still ways for nature to get air, especially mold spores, which are super tiny, from one place to the other. And generally, actually not generally, always in building science, moisture, humidity goes from wet to dry.
Okay.
Never the
That's
other
very
way.
fascinating, Cheryl. I did not know
Yeah.
all that about all the moisture. That's good. So I'm going to start testing my moisture throughout my house just to check everything out. Okay, so Cheryl, something that I feel is so common in houses is that musty smell in the basement. Is that like 100% guaranteed that there is mold if you smell that musty smell, or it's just that it's a little damp?
So you can have musty smells in slab homes as well, and in homes with crawl spaces. And I would say 100% if you smell an off odor, musty is often a description. Some people describe it as a cat smell. But I would say 99% of the time you have mold somewhere. But the other side of that coin is if you smell nothing, that doesn't mean that you don't have mold. You can have mold and smell nothing. So, but if you do smell it, and I did a presentation once at a conference and it was for other architects. And all the questions at the end of my presentation were about people's own homes. And that
Yeah.
was one of the questions was, so if my vestibule, if my foyer smells kind of musty, does it mean I have mold there? And I honestly would say probably. If it's not mold, it's bacteria. They both like a damp condition that's trapped. Doesn't mean that there may be a ton, but in basements especially, people haven't been running dehumidifiers all the time. Cardboard just absorbs moisture. Any cardboard boxes sitting on a concrete floor is bad news. On the other hand, crawl spaces that have exposed dirt. When people are sick, my clients are often sick. I do some individual consulting. The first thing I want to know is what kind of foundation they have. And it's not because I'm going to say, oh, that foundation is bad. It's that they have different problems with them. But with crawl spaces in particular, it's exposed dirt or an unsealed vapor barrier. So dirt is full of mold spores.
See, that's
And the
interesting
reason,
because I lived out in California for a good decade, and our one house that we ended up purchasing, it was, a lot of those houses are raised foundations. And I think, oh, well, there shouldn't be as much mold because you're getting more airflow underneath. But I've since learned that actually a lot of those houses can actually have quite a bit of problems.
yeah. So usually the ventilation isn't enough. And think about when
Mhm.
you open a window, in the corner, you're not feeling any breeze. You may feel a
Right.
breeze right in front of the open window, but as soon as you go off in a corner away from the air current, it is kind of dank over there. And so the same thing happens in crawl spaces, and usually the openings aren't enough. I can think of one client in particular where I thought maybe it was okay ventilated, but in most cases, what the building codes, which are to protect us, and what the building science community is and the building community is coming to terms with is that exposed dirt is just bad news. And that
Interesting.
it's not enough for us to try to vent our crawl spaces. We should just condition the space, which means you close all the vents, you seal the floor to the walls and the columns and the pipes and everything else with heavy duty plastic vapor barrier product, something that's not going to tear, 10 mil or better. And then you're actually going to you're going to condition the air, which means conditioning can mean just dehumidification in warm climates. In some climates, it could be dehumidification and additional heat. It I don't think there's any place in the United States or Canada where you would do cooling because cold air falls. If we're cooling our home above the lower levels, that cold air is dropping on its own. So we would typically want to close all the any vents or anything down low, but heat rises. So it's not going to want to go down low. And mold does not like warm and dry. So if we can make our spaces warm and dry, again, dry is a relative term, so is warm. But we want to avoid the conditions that mold likes, which is damp or cold and damp,
Yeah.
primarily. But warm and humid isn't good either. So think about when you're sitting outside on the patio and your glass of ice water is just dripping.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if
You don't want your
that
windows looking like that.
No, not in the winter and in the summer. And any time of year, the air conditioning could be colding some metal components in the wall, or making them cold. And then if your humidity is too high in the house, you can have condensation happening there in walls, in attics. Some people in winter have their attics raining because there's so much humidity rising through the house, and it gets into the attic, and then the nails from the fiberglass or asphalt roofing are sticking through. You can see them up there. This is
Oh,
something
wow.
anybody could do is go look in your attic, just with a flashlight, not your phone, with a big flashlight. Look around. Do you see rusty nails? Do you see black spots around where the nail comes through the wood? Do you see something that's fuzzy? Does it look like lint? Some mold can be any color. It could be white. It could look like lint, like spider webs. It could be green, yellow, purple, orange. It could be any color. The bacteria can be as well. So, in addition to monitoring humidity, I would say vigilance. Look around. I work with my clients, having them take pictures. I didn't know I could work remotely, but it turns out that I can quite successfully. But
Oh,
I'm
good.
having my clients take pictures of their home. You can do this yourself. Take pictures of your home on all the sides and then upload them to your computer so you can see them on a screen. But it's a frozen moment in time where you start looking closely for anomalies. Is there a dark spot? Is there some white stuff on the brick? Is there a wavy line by the foundation that's dark? So all these things have a cause, and they might be pointing, they're a symptom of something. I try to teach people how to do that and what to see, but I also do it individually. But it's kind of like looking at our body. Do you have a rash? Is your skin yellow? Is do you have low muscle tone? Are you, then there's the other things of, are you tired? Or your energy bills really high? Or, there's other things. Our buildings are a lot like the body.
Yeah,
And
no, I think it's fascinating and good information to know. So I have a question with the roof. What about metal roofs? Can you have the same problems or typically less?
so I would say with any material, you can install it well, or you can it can be
Mm,
installed poorly. And so metal roofs, there's a lot of, I mean, it's not likely to leak from above very often, but talk about a condensation potential source because it's
okay.
metal. So it's well known that metal roofs have a condensation potential where you could have even more rain. So I talked about rain with an asphalt roof because the warm air from inside, which is too humid, again, monitor your humidity. If it's too humid and it's all going up into the attic and then raining on all your insulation, then every year your insulation is becoming less and less effective. You have more air leakage. And so the same thing can happen in a metal roof, only it may be even more condensation because the metal can be, if warm air can hit it, the metal will be cold like outside. And
Yeah.
then the warm moisture can hit it and we can have that same condensation. So I like metal roofs in terms of leaking, but if the metal roof is a very low slope and the details where it connects to a wall or connects to a valley or above, how it connects to a wall above a window, for instance, or how the gutters are done, those things can all make a really good system not work well. So
Okay. Good
it's
to know.
really about the details. I wish I could say,
Yeah.
oh, and people always want that. What was it? Just tell me what to buy. And unfortunately, it's by quality and understanding what quality is. And just like you probably have done a ton of research as I have on health and health symptoms,
Mhm.
it's being aware of that and then looking for causes and then starting to understand what does a healthy building look like.
Yeah, no, this is great information, Cheryl. So I have a question. I have to say it. I know the answer because we've already talked about it, but I hear this from clients that, we've ended up discovering that they have mold and they're like, but my house is brand new. We literally just built this house 2 years ago or something like that. And obviously you've talked about it, right? It's a moisture issue, really. So my biggest concern, and I see this with builds around where we're at, right? The house is getting built up, it's just the studs, and it gets rained on. Is like how well is that wood drying out before they slap the sheetrock on it and you have like a perfect situation? Is that of concern?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's very much of concern. So, I mean, part of the reason I live in Wyoming and is because we were looking for a place where we would have, since we didn't build a house to move, we sold our house that we built that we did end up remediating and recovering from what little mold we had. And we didn't actually have a lot, but it was affecting our health. Then we needed to sell that house before we went somewhere else. So we ended up buying a house here in Wyoming. And part of it was because I know it's a dry climate. They don't use air conditioning much. I don't see what's called lumber mold here because it is so dry. But other places, the wood is showing up moldy. And so the
Yeah,
key to
that's
know
true
about
too.
that is that when mold grows on wood, it's because there's a moisture content in the wood that is a number. And we can actually measure that number. Very few people do unless they're following me or one of my students or clients. But mold grows on wood at a moisture content of 20, which kiln dried lumber is coming out at 19. And the meters can be off by 3%. So there you see the problem. And it's an industry problem that I am doing my best to create awareness around. I tell people if you're building new, I would try to get moisture content 15 wood. That means it's 15% moisture content, pushes you down a little more. Then, yes, all buildings are going to get wet in the construction process. The key is it dry enough to continue? So, one, we need the builders to be aware. And if there's puddles, they need to get rid of the puddles. If there's a pile of snow, they need to be shoveled out. And then before we go to finish and put an insulation and drywall, somebody should be measuring. It should be the professional, but since it may not be the professional who knows that, then it needs to be the homeowner who has a little bit more robust meter and they with pins, and we're measuring the moisture content in different areas. And if it's below, say, 15, then you probably are good to go ahead and start drywalling. But that depends because there's something called an equilibrium moisture content. So the wood comes kiln dried and it's going to continue to dry in whatever location that you're in to a level that's called the equilibrium. So the equilibrium number, which is where it settles, there's a number for inside and number for outside. And the Forest Products Lab, there's actually a book called the Wood Handbook published by the Forest Products Lab. It's a government lab. And you can get it online. You can put in Wood Handbook, Forest Products Lab, and it will come up. The PDFs for each chapter are there. You can read about wood and moisture. I think it's chapter 13 and 14, or no, 12 and 13. But every location, so Arizona is going to have a different moisture content equilibrium than you will have in Iowa or that
Right.
someone will have in Florida. And so the key is to say, okay, find some wood that's dry, that really doesn't seem to have been affected. It was protected or whatever. And you say, what is that? Oh, that number is 10 in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, or wherever it happens to be. That's your equilibrium number. Then you look around and you find some areas that are 17, 18, 19. The builder's going to say, well, that's all okay. 9 times out of 10, unless they're following me. Then you want to say, no, look at this forest products lab um, document, and it says it has more drying to do. And so those areas we want to focus on, whether it's with fans or heat, to accelerate the drying and keep an eye on it before we cover them with drywall and continue on and closing the building. So it
Awesome.
requires
So
hands.
good, Cheryl.
But you
Such
are
good
so
stuff.
right that new homes are be afraid. I think, I mean, I'm afraid of them. We had the, I wouldn't finish basements right away. Never, never, never in a new home. And then I really be watching the construction process. And yeah, I do have a course on how to build a safe home. It's really for clients, but it is helpful for professionals have taken it and have gotten a lot of value out of it. It's really my insights in living through all of this and my background as an architect to say, what I thought we were doing a good job. What are we missing? I know architects. I know lots of architects. And I know that most builders as well as architects, their intention is to do a good job. People aren't maliciously like overlooking this stuff.
No,
It's just so complicated. And the
it is.
sustainability movement, as good as it is to have low energy and all that stuff, has made our buildings even more complicated in a way that nobody knew what was going to happen when we tightened up our buildings super tight and then didn't change how they were leaking. So
Yeah.
we change how we're trying to tighten them up, and they're not drafty anymore, and now they're still leaking in the same places that they did in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 20s, but now we've trapped all that moisture. And so it, unfortunately, it's a complicated problem, but I feel like education and knowledge is power, and the more we know, the more we can do our best, and then just keep an eye on stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Cheryl, I am so grateful for you and grateful for the work you're doing. And like I said, people just don't know. They don't understand. Builders don't know unless they've probably personally dealt with it, themselves, because it's not something that's just taught out there. So, Cheryl, one last question is because I know people listening might think, okay, well, how do I go about and this may be a really loaded question, so feel free to, if we just need to send them to resources, because I'm going to let you share about that too, because I want anyone who possibly could benefit from you to go visit your website. But how do you find someone good if you need to remediate a house like that? Still like loaded question. I don't have a good answer for it. What is your advice for people? How do you find someone that could be a good remediator?
Well, again, I'm going to say education and knowledge. So I told you about my story with the duct cleaning,
Yeah.
and there's certification for duct cleaning. I actually hired somebody that was certified. However, that didn't prevent me getting scammed. And I checked references, didn't prevent it. So in the end, what I had to do was learn enough. And so what I do is I have a course that teaches people that teaches my
Good.
insights. So recorded, it's as affordable as it could possibly be. And I found myself explaining that, answering that question, especially with remediation over and over again. And so as questions kept coming up that I'm answering repeatedly, I decided, okay, I'm going to record the basics in a video. I use photos. I use lots of pictures and explanation. They're pretty fast paced, and I have PDF resources for you to continue to research, because I always think we just have to always keep learning. And sometimes I learn something from my clients, but remediation in particular, there are agencies there's several, there's at least 3 or 4 big ones that certify remediators. That would be a good start. But in my course, what I talk about is there's an ANSI standard called, it's a S520. I think it's called S520. It's from the IICRC. And anybody you want somebody to say that they're working according to a standard. It's not required in most places, but do you use any standards? Because otherwise they can pull anything out of their back pocket to tell you. And then it's just like, oh, it's good because this is the number, the threshold number. There is no threshold number. Don't let anybody. So I teach people and I try to share insights about things that should be red flags to people. Just because they have like a master's degree, I don't know about that, but I would want to know what kind of
Yeah.
standards are you using? How do you work? What's your process? What kind of report am I going to get? Which is fine. But the standard is critical because it's something in writing that you can read. It's expensive to buy. If they're supposedly using that standard, they should be able to share a copy with you. So if they don't have a copy, then I'd be a little suspicious about that, knowing what's in it. I
Yeah.
do share some key things that are in it in some of my courses, but the key is to at least have an overview of
Mhm.
what they're supposed to be doing. And then there's things I would do it all as conservative as possible. The EPA has a mold guide that's not bad as long as you follow the most conservative. When they say, "Oh, it's not that much, don't worry about it. You can do this, that, or the other thing," don't believe them on that. I would say just stick to,
Uh,
if they're saying to create containment, create containment. Create double containment so that when you take your containment down, there's still another layer while you're trying to figure out if they got everything.
mhm.
So tips like
Yeah.
that. But I'd always get more than one opinion. You can learn a lot from people that are giving you prices on stuff, and they
Yes, you
usually will come
can.
from me. So when one guy doesn't match another guy, then you start asking questions about that. Um, it should be very detailed what they're going to do, itemized in terms of what it is. In some cases, yeah, sometimes there's people getting really high prices and they're getting really poor work. And you can find someone like me to run it by. I give second opinions on a lot of things, even with buying houses. I often am doing a second opinion on their home inspection whenever I found something to share. But there are other people that are learning from me. So a lot of the social media, there's people who more and more, I'm proud to say, are learning things, but just take everything with a
Right.
grain of salt, because
Yeah.
like the telephone game, I hear things that I heard you say, and I'm like, whoa, I never said that.
Oh boy.
But it's like, as you know, as the communication goes, sometimes things get distorted and it's not right.
Yeah.
So do your best to find research that supports what you do, but you're going to have to do research, I think.
Yeah,
I
I
try to fast
agree.
track
It's
people, but what did you do? Did you have trouble
yeah,
hiring?
we ended up essentially learning and doing it ourselves in a sense of like we didn't do the actual remediation, but we learned the information and that and it actually time for us, we thought the bulk of the mold was in our master bath that had not been remodeled yet. So we thought that's where it was from. And it actually ended up that summer we were actually getting our roof redone and oh no, it was from the roof. So previous owners, I don't know if it was the ones right before us or it could have been before that, when they fixed a big chunk of the roof, they put whatever that paper stuff is down that's supposed to repel water. Oh, Cheryl, this will like make you cringe. They put it upside down. So it wasn't repelling water, it was absorbing water.
Oh,
And it happened to be right above where the washer dryer was. So the dryer had a vent, right? Well, that corner vent, it had fallen off because it was in the attic space. We had a perfect storm that we had this warm, moist air getting blown up into a very moist attic. And when they took that off, it was black mold like you wouldn't believe. And so that's why I got so sick because there was a vent right above the washer dryer, right where all that black mold was. So it was coming in through that vent. And it was in the master area. So that's why I was the sickest because I work from home for the most part. And it was not fun. Again, I don't wish it upon anybody. But it also, my husband and I always say like, oh, it was brutal, but and it can get very costly. But if you don't have your health, then what do you have, right? If you're dealing with mast cell activation, chronic fatigue, all the body aches and just everything that comes, with it. It's just a storm, as you know, that, my husband and I always look back, if this gives anybody who may be going through this at this point or may in the future, we will say today that we would do it again. I know that sounds so dumb, but it really made us grow as individual people and also as a family. It ultimately got me healthier, even though it was like you said at the beginning, the buckets, right? So my bucket was already getting full because I don't detox well. That was the missing piece in my health, and I knew so much. And it was a piece that just pushed me into learning so much more about health to like just this crazy, crazy deep level. It got my kids healthier. Ultimately, we are healthier because of it, even
Mhm.
though it was horrendous to have to go through it. And again, I don't wish it upon anybody, but I also know what it's like to suffer living with molds. And like you said, Lyme can come with it and all the things. And it's like, yeah, that's no way to live. And I work with people that, are dealing with it, and it can be rough, but there is hope on the other side. There really, really is. And you and I are both proof of that. Us, our families, our living space, like we remediated this because it was this decision of like, well, do you just try to sell a moldy house and let someone else remediate, take it under the studs, whatever. And it was like, but then to move to another house that may not be any better, we're like, you know what? We're going to fix it. We love this land that we have. So we dealt with it and still here and doing good. So
Good, good. Sometimes it's better to work with what you know than start
yeah.
over with something you don't know,
Hmm.
to be honest.
Yeah. Good
And I'm
advice.
not the
Yep.
person that would say go buy new. There, you could be that there's some older houses that are really well built that are going to be better. I would plan on like redoing kitchens and bathrooms. And the other thing I would say is oftentimes there's more than one source.
Yeah.
So that would be the other key takeaway. But yeah, I completely agree with you that life leads you where you're supposed to go. I mean, I'm doing an online business as you are. I don't even like being online. So I I would never I didn't wake up one day and say, "Oh, I want to help people with mold in their water damage in their buildings." No, I just realized that I knew things that could help people, and how could I
Yeah.
not talk about it? How could I not
Exactly.
share what I know for the people who care
Hmm.
and who want to know? I mean, there's plenty of people who don't want to know. So,
Yeah, ignorance
um,
is, as some people say, ignorance is bliss. I'm like, no, knowledge is power. Because if you don't know what's going on, you don't know what to do to help fix it.
yeah, and you're right about the cost. I mean, your healthcare is so expensive. And then there's if you can't work or work efficiently, um, yeah, it's better to focus on. And I applaud you for what you're doing because I looked at your website and I was like, oh, moving is important. Keep moving your lymph. And even if it's, light Pilates or something or some light exercise while you're laying on the floor, don't stop moving. I have found that to be really critical, even when you feel like you can't. Just
Yeah,
keep going
abs-
forward. And there's a lot of angels out there that come into our lives. So that's been true for me. And things pop up on my screen and I just try to focus on like there's a reason stuff happens to us and I'm sharing because it happened to me. I wouldn't be sharing all this story if it didn't happen over and over and over again, so but it takes I always tell people if you've learned something here, turn around and help someone else, turn around and
yeah,
and spread the word, um, because someone out there, some people say like, no, 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 and then someone else will be like, oh, I should check that out,
yeah,
and
it
can really
is.
make a difference even.
Yes. So, with that said, anyone listening, share this episode, share this conversation with other people that you think, again, knowledge is power. So, you just never know what conversation can share one little nugget of information that a light bulb moment goes off for someone and is like, oh my gosh, this is what we're dealing with. So, Cheryl, I want to thank you so much for, again, all the work you're doing. Thank you for taking the time to come on here and chat with me. I feel like I get a little emotional talking about all this stuff because it is so personal for both of us. Has impacted our lives in ways, and I'm sure changed both of our lives. I know it has. For me, like you said, you're sharing and doing all this that I'm sure before it happened, you would have never thought you'd be doing. So, will you just remind everybody what your website is, where they can go to learn more? And I know you've got some great offerings and stuff that they can go and check out.
Yeah, so avoidingmold.com is my website. You can also search on my name, Cheryl Ciecko, or even Cheryl Mold Architect, and I come up. I'm like the only one. And I have a lot of free resources. I have a free mold kit that you can get started with on my website. I'm also on Facebook. I have a public Facebook page, Cheryl Ciecko Architect. I have a YouTube channel, and I'm on Instagram. And so all that free content. I'm sharing things that I see wherever I go. And I have three major courses. I have my Build a Safe Home course, which is my master course, where definitely for people who are building, it's a great opportunity to educate yourself. You can do it at any time you want. You can watch it over and over again. It does come with access to something called the Dwell Well Institute, which is my online community. And so it comes with a year of that free. You can also join the Dwell Well Institute on its own, or take my second course, which is a mini course, which is Moisture Basics. And that one includes a month of the Dwell Well Institute. And that's basically teaching you how to see all the defects around us that could lead to mold, both for prevention and discovery. Going forward, I have I have a Before You Buy or Rent, which follows up on the Moisture Basics. And then I have bundles of courses on remediation. So you'll find those all on my website at avoidingmold.com. And so I hope that's helpful for people. I'm always looking to know what I don't have that people want to know. But yes, I think leaving with hope, and that there can be like a sliver somewhere that you can pull out that sliver and suddenly everything falls into place. And that was the thing holding you back. And it oftentimes has something to do with the air we breathe.
Yes, it does. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl.
Avoidingmold.com.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.